Good day. Today we will look at logic and language. Philosophy begins by challenging what ordinary people take for granted. Traditional and mystical sources of belief once guided human understanding, but as philosophers rejected such authorities, they faced the question of how to persuade others. Their answer was to appeal to reason itself. Logic and epistemology became the foundation for evaluating belief. These disciplines allow thinkers to critique assumptions based not on authority but on arguments accessible to all. Philosophy, then, is the pursuit of justified belief, rather than belief merely inherited or assumed. This opening frames the lecture's central tension: the world as it appears versus the world as analyzed. Once logic becomes the standard inquiry, everyday concepts must withstand rational scrutiny. This sets the stage for understanding why later paradoxes and debates arise. With this foundation established, we can now turn to how philosophy defines its own starting conditions. Having introduced philosophy's reliance on logic, we now examine the foundational questions that make philosophical reasoning feasible or even possible. The foundations of philosophical inquiry. Philosophy begins by asking three essential questions. What is knowledge? What is evidence? Why logic? These inquiries ensure that philosophical investigation rests on solid conceptual ground. Without understanding what counts as genuine knowledge, debates risk devolving into mere opinion. Likewise, without agreed criteria for evidence, no argument can truly persuade. Logic, then, provides universal standards that prevent reasoning from slipping into subjectivity or even cultural bias. By distinguishing belief from justified belief, philosophy aims for clarity before tackling larger metaphysical or even ethical questions. The method requires precision, carefully defining terms, examining presuppositions, and building arguments that withstand scrutiny. These questions that you have in front of you form the intellectual scaffolding, building blocks that supports all subsequent inquiry. With these foundations in place, we can distinguish philosophy's role from that of other disciplines, especially create the distinction between philosophy and science. Philosophy versus science. No? This is something we need to pay attention to. No? Uh, excuse me. Science and philosophy complement one another, but pursue different ends. Yes, they're complementary sciences. Science uncovers empirical facts through observation and experimentation. It identifies what is the case in the physical world. Philosophy, however, concerns itself with what those facts mean. Once scientific data is established, philosophers ask conceptual, interpretive, and normative questions. For example, what implications a discovery may have for ethics or social policy. Thus, philosophical disputes often begin after scientific facts are agreed upon. Science cannot tell us how to define concepts like personhood, justice, nor can it determine what values society should uphold. Philosophy then steps in at the point where facts alone cannot guide human decision making. We see this interplay clearly when scientific facts are agreed upon, but the definitions of these concepts remain contested, as is the debate over abortion. Let's look at the abortion debate. Everyone agrees on embryological facts at 5 to 6 weeks. Everybody agrees on the size, the developmental stage, the genetic identity. The controversy centers not on the science, but on the definition of human being. Some interpret it biologically, meaning any organism with human DNA qualifies. Others interpret it socially or functionally, requiring traits like consciousness, autonomy, or the ability to participate in community. The facts yield different conclusions also, because the concept or the understanding of human being contains many different perceptions. Uh, that means we don't always agree about what we mean by human being. Philosophy confronts this ambiguity head on. To resolve moral disputes, we must clarify the meanings embedded in our language. This reveals a larger lesson. Language shapes our perception of reality. To understand this dynamic, we must look more closely at how words relate to the world, or how worlds are related to objects. Words and objects. Ordinarily, language is transparent. Ordinarily, we look through words to the objects they denote. When someone says flower, we do not analyze the term. We visualize the object. Philosophy disrupts, ginugulo, interrupts this transparency, drawing attention to language itself. This shift marks the beginning of philosophical inquiry, recognizing that words and the world are not identical. Once separated, the relationship between word and object becomes puzzling. Language can mislead, simplify, distort, or conceal. Philosophers analyze how well linguistic categories map onto reality and where they actually fail. So, one such failure, of course, involves the paradox of permanence. Language suggests stability, but the world seems to offer none. The physical world is constantly changing. Children age, leaves fall, bodies decay. Yet language treats objects as stable entities. The word cat applies to a newborn kitten and a 12-year-old feline equally, creating a sense of identity despite transformation. This stability is linguistic, not physical. Thus, language constructs continuity where nature provides flux. The permanence we attribute to objects arise from linguistic categorization rather than inherent stability. This leads naturally to questions about identity. How do we define what remains the same through change? So when we look at our classmates, for example, how do we know they're still the same classmates, even if they look differently already from the first moment you've met? So let's look at identity through change. Identity depends heavily on conceptual choice. If I define myself by my biological age, I am one age. If by my soul, I may be eternal. If by a religious rebirth, I could be a year old. Each interpretation relies on a different conceptual framework, altering who I am considered to be. This demonstrates that identity is not simply found objective, objectively. It is assigned through language and belief systems. Definitions determine how we categorize persons, which carries ethical and legal consequences. Recognizing these conceptual shifts brings us to the point where philosophy begins: the separation of word from world. When philosophy begins, philosophical inquiry arises when language becomes visible. In ordinary life, we equate words with their referents without question. But once we begin to reflect, we see that language is a tool that can be examined, questioned, or doubted. This reflective stance exposes paradoxes and contradictions within everyday concepts. Philosophy begins not in certainty, but in perplexity. Paradox has played a central role in philosophical development since antiquity, as we can see in some ancient thinkers. Now let's look at some ancient paradoxes. Heraclitus's famous line that you cannot step into the same river twice is important. While Heraclitus said one cannot step into the same river twice, and Cratylus claimed one cannot even step in once, the water is already changing. These paradoxes reveal that identity over time is not as straightforward as language suggests. If everything is continuously changing, then nothing remains the same. Such puzzles force us to question assumptions about stability and even sameness. They sharpen philosophical insight by exposing hidden conceptual difficulties. Since paradoxes appear in Chinese neo-Taoist thought also, uh, and that these paradoxes are similar to Heraclitus, we can look at how neo-Taoist thought examines everyday experiences such as touching, no? To be touched. The neo-Taoist paradox asks, if the finger touches the table, how can the touch be undone? If touching truly occurs, what mechanism restores separation? This problem reveals logical tension within a seemingly simple event. Ordinary perception accepts touching and separating as effortless. But philosophical analysis finds contradiction. Such puzzles highlight the limits of intuition and the need for rigorous conceptual distinctions. The use of paradoxes is important here to expose linguistic complexity. And this continues with a very famous paradox of the white horse, no? And that's what we're going to look at there, the white horse paradox. So let's look at the paradox or the white horse paradox, because this is also a very interesting paradox to consider. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Laozi Gongsun Lung's paradox on a white horse is not a horse challenges assumptions about categories. While it appears absurd, philosophical analysis shows that it distinguishes a subset from a general class. A white horse is not the same as the universal category horse, even though it belongs to it. It's like a gumamela. Gumamela is not flower. The gumamela is a flower, but gumamela as a word is different from the word flower. Obviously, they differ in spelling, but in the case of Lao Zigong Sung Lung, he will speak of a white horse being different from a horse. This paradox shows how linguistic ambiguity can mislead reasoning. Clarifying definitions resolves confusions. From these, we move to definitional disputes or more definitional disputes. Philosophy deals with concepts, conceptus, ideas, something that we create or something that is constructed. And this resist empirical resolution. Disputes about art or the human person or religion basically hinge on definitions. These questions reveal how language shapes ethical and even cultural decisions. Now let us consider how definitions can affect life and death. And we can see that in the case of a brain dead person. Brain death complicates traditional definitions of life. Though they are biologically alive and active, a brain dead patient lacks personhood. And this raises profound ethical dilemmas regarding rights and even identity. Definitions also underlie not just disagreements about who should live, who can live, and who should die, but they also include questions about justice. And here we see the case of distributive justice. Though economic facts are agreed upon in these cases, fairness or issues of fairness remains contested. Competing principles basically guide distribution. Philosophy tries to clarify these values, revealing their moral foundations, their implicit assumptions, their presumptions, if you will. And therefore, our understanding of what justice is will largely be based on how we define justice. To understand, therefore, how philosophy can help unearth or clarify these assumptions, we need to look at the tools that we need for such an analysis. And an important tool in understanding this analysis is actually logic. Logic, therefore, must first be clarified or better yet, defined. Logic, we need to understand, is normative, no? Prescribing us how we ought to think. And it distinguishes valid from invalid reasoning. Without logic, belief would collapse into mere preference or subjective preference. And we don't like that. So a simple example illustrates this logical structure. The case of Judy the Gapi. The case of Judy the Gapi. Class inclusion lets us infer facts about individual cases. When we say all gappies are fish, we can see why we can say that Judy, who is a gappy, cannot survive in a packet because gappies are fish. This reveals how meaning encodes necessity. We expand this into formal reasoning when we consider logical arguments. Universal statements, or in logic, statement A or A type statements yield necessary conclusions. Validity depends on structure, not subject matter. It's more form rather than content. Logical clarity prevents false assumptions. So when we say language also governs um, moral classifications, and we can look at it in the case of murder and its definition. Murder, for example, is conceptually restricted to humans intentionally killing fellow humans. We don't call it murder when we kill insects like cockroaches or mosquitoes, or when we slaughter chickens or pigs. Moral debates hinge on classification. That's what we mean. Does ethics also depends on linguistic boundaries? Something that we need to pay attention to. Here we now explore how language structures reality. Language organizes perception by linking particulars to universals. Concepts guide how we interpret the world. But how can we know whether language represents reality accurately or not? Is something we still need to pay attention to. And here we see why there is a problem of representation. We cannot compare words to reality without using, again, words. And these limits our certainty. Thus, philosophy must confront skepticism. Modern thinkers expand this sort of skepticism, especially, for example, Jacques Derrida. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent, says Ludwig Wittgenstein. Derrida argues that without access to reality, especially to reality outside or beyond language, accuracy becomes undecidable. Meaning may be constructed rather than discovered. Quine illustrates these further. Gavagai could mean many things. Observations alone cannot determine meaning. Thus, translation and even communication rests on assumptions. And whether we like it or not, even the ancient traditions recognized this. Ancient skepticism. Skepticism is the beginning of wisdom. Ancient Indian and Chinese philosophers recognized early that knowledge claims depend on assumptions that may not be demonstrable. Nyaya logicians debated whether perception alone grants certainty, while Buddhists challenged whether any stable self or object exists behind sensory appearances. Likewise, Chuangzi questioned whether distinctions we rely on, true or false, right, wrong, reflect objective reality or merely human habits of speech and thought. These traditions show that skepticism is not a uniquely Western development, but a global philosophical impulse. This skepticism emphasized that without a shared external standard, claims to knowledge become precarious. If all perspectives are context bound, then certainty becomes elusive. Yet this realization also motivates the search for reliable criteria, logic, inference, linguistic clarity, which different traditions attempt to build. This concern appears vividly in Chuangzi's reflection on opinion. Chuangzi observes that every opinion seems correct from the standpoint of the person who holds it. Without an overarching standard, disagreements cannot be resolved by appeal to reason alone. What one person calls good, another may call harmful. What one calls true, another may call false. His insight exposes the instability of belief when untethered from a method for evaluation. The challenge is not that opinions differ, but that there may be no neutral standpoint from which to adjudicate them. This leads to the deeper problem of whether speech itself can reliably convey meaning. So we need to ask ourselves, is speech real? If meaning is unstable or endlessly shifting, speech risks becoming little more than noise, no more significant than the cries of animals. If definitions shift with each speaker and each content, communication becomes fragile. Yet human societies depend on the partial success of speech. Even if language is imperfect, it is sufficient for coordination, culture, and the transmission of knowledge. Some philosophers, however, use skepticism not destructively, but playfully. Let's look at Chuangzi and Wei Shi. Chuangzi and Wei Shi use paradox and humor to loosen rigid thinking. Their playful approach shows that philosophy need not always argue. It can illuminate, by unsettling expectations. Paradox becomes a tool for freeing the mind. This method invites flexibility in thought, reminding us that logic and language are human creations, not absolute structures. But Gorgias offers a more radical challenge. Gorgias is a sophist. Gorgias claimed that nothing exists. Two, even if something existed, we could not know it. And even if we knew it, we could not communicate it. These theses dismantle every link in the chain connecting reality, knowledge, and expression. Though extreme, his argument exposes vulnerabilities in epistemology and language theory, prompting later philosophers to strengthen conceptual foundations. Language also shapes moral categories, often in hidden ways. Let's look at anthropocentric language or human-centered language. Human languages often reflect human-centered assumptions. For example, murder applies only to human victims, though humans kill many other beings intentionally. Categories like vermin or pet encode moral distinctions that lack objective grounding. Such terms reveal cultural bias embedded in vocabulary, reminding us that language subtly structures ethical perception. Philosophy helps make such distortions visible. How does philosophy make language visible? Chuangzi compares language to dirty glasses. You only notice the dirt when vision becomes unclear. Likewise, we notice conceptual distortion only when language fails to capture reality adequately. Philosophical reflection cleans these lenses, restoring clarity and revealing unnoticed assumptions. However, excessive reflection can itself generate confusion. And that's also something to pay attention to. Let's look at Chuangzi's confusion. Chuangzi warns that analyzing language too deeply can create paradoxes where none originally existed. If we press language beyond its natural function, we become problems rather than solve them. This insight illustrates the limits of linguistic theory and the danger of over intellectualization. This brings us also to the long standing puzzle of non being. What is this problem of non being? Non being and being give birth to one another. Tao Te Ching. We speak meaningfully about unicorns, fictional characters, and hypothetical objects, though none exist in the world. How can language refer to what is not? This paradox challenges theories of reference and existence. The problem shows that naming does not require the existence of an object. Instead, names may refer to concepts, descriptions, or even mental constructs. Wittgenstein clarifies how language functions in practice. According to Ludwig Wittgenstein, language works smoothly in everyday life, but becomes problematic when removed from its practical contexts. Words derive meaning from use, not abstract definitions. Misunderstandings arise when we treat words as if they must correspond perfectly to reality. The example of the pen illustrates this duality more clearly. The pen paradox. A pen may refer to a universal category or a specific object. The same phrase shifts meaning depending on context, failing to distinguish universals from particulars breeds confusion. The Nyaya philosophers offer a richer model for this one. What's the Nyaya analysis? Nyaya theory holds that words refer simultaneously to an individual, a universal, and a distinguishing feature. This triadic structure explains how we identify and classify objects. Meaning becomes a layered phenomenon rather than a simple one-to-one mapping. So there's no one-to-one here, but an inclusion of everything else. That's what is being said. Next, we distinguish and examine the distinction between names and thing. So, naming the name. Naming the name. Quotation marks reveal that words themselves can be objects of reference. Cow has three letters, C-O-W, and it differs fundamentally from a cow that eats grass. Such distinctions prevent fallacies that arise from conflating symbols with their reference. This leads to the classic problem of universals and particulars. What is this classic problem of universals and particulars? Universals provide conceptual stability to things, while particulars bring about changes. Confusing them creates philosophical tension. Philosophy separates these layers to avoid categorical mistakes. So categories themselves become necessity or even become necessary for thought. So in order for us to be able to think, we need to think in terms of categories. Without categories, perception collapses into chaos. Categories structure memories, recognition, and reasoning. Thus, the mind actively organizes the world using conceptual frameworks. So, personhood illustrates how categories influence ethics. So, how does categories influence ethics? Here we speak of when does a person begin and when the person ends. Different definitions of personhood biological, psychological, social, yield different moral conclusions. These debates show that conceptual clarity is essential in ethical reasoning. Similar issues arise, of course, not just when we start calling somebody a person, but also when a person ends. Brain dead, for example, disrupts traditional understandings of death. Biology and consciousness diverge. Determining when a person ends becomes partly a conceptual matter. So categories do more than classify. They create objects. So what are the things that categories create? Objects persist only because categories assign them identity. No? Nagkakaroon ng isang bagay kasi kinakategorize. Without language, experience becomes pure flux, changing. Thus, categorization constructs the stable world we navigate. Heraclitus famously was the one who recognized these flux. That's why he would say, everything flows and nothing stands still. Heraclitus agrees that opposites coexist. Life contains death, ascent contains descent, change is a fundamental reality. Language, therefore, artificially freezes this flux to create stable concepts. This yields surprising alternatives. And we can identify two strange alternatives. If everything changes, nothing remains identical. Or if each moment is treated as static, countless selves replace one another. Both possibilities challenge our understanding of identity. Legal reasoning, therefore, exposes this tension and allows us to pay attention at this tension. Here we can look at the Leopold Loeb defense. Criminals, Leopold and Loeb, claims, for example, that identity change raise difficult questions for justice. If they are no longer the same persons, can they be held accountable? Can they still be held accountable? Society answers by insisting on continuity. But the metaphysics is a bit more complex here. Motion paradoxes, no? Movement, deepen these concerns. Let's look at some motion paradoxes from here. No? Of course, the case of the Leopold Loeb, they're basically saying, I'm no longer the person who did it before, so why are you still punishing me? You should set me free. It didn't work, of course. It didn't work. Now let's look at the motion motion paradoxes. If time consists of discrete instants, motion appears impossible. A moving object would occupy a fixed position at each moment. Thus, motion conflicts with strict logical analysis because things are just moving, nothing remains the same. Plato offers a way to stabilize the theory. Plato says universals or forms provides unchanging standards behind mutable appearances. Knowledge, therefore, depends on accessing these eternal structures. Yet puzzles remain about what objects fundamentally are. No? Uh, so, what are these one, right? Here we see the stone paradox. Gong Sung Lung, so is the one who basically push it forward. Okay. Uh, so what does Gong Sung Lung say uh, along these terms? A single object possesses attributes like color, hardness, and the like that exists differently from the object itself. This raises questions about substance and attribute relations. Wishy expands relativity further. And here we see Wishy's paradoxes. Wishy presents paradoxes that undermine absolute distinctions. Claims such as the largest thing has nothing beyond it, or that which has no thickness can extend 1,000 miles, challenge intuitive understandings of size, motion, and space. His paradoxes revealed that commonly used categories, large, small, near, far, shifts depending on perspective. These arguments highlight that many concepts are relational rather than absolute. Philosophical inquiry must therefore examine not only objects, but the frameworks through which comparisons are made. From these paradoxes arises the theory of relative concepts. Tall and short, young and old, such descriptors depend entirely on the comparison class. A person tall in one group may be short in another. Most qualities exist on continua, not as fixed absolutes. Recognizing relativity prevents linguistic rigidity and cautions against moral or social judgments based on shifting standards. These insights prepare us for Wishy's final conclusion. What is Wishy's final conclusion? Wishy argues that if distinctions collapse under scrutiny, we should cultivate an attitude of universal equality. If opposites coexist and categories shift, there no being is inherently superior. His conclusion, therefore, love all things equally, the universe is one, emerges from metaphysical insight into the relativity of distinctions. This claim is both ethical and philosophical, if you will. Unity arises when linguistic boundaries dissolve. It challenges assumptions that moral worth depends on rigid classifications. We turn now to the famous paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. And when we start talking about Achilles and the tortoise, we cannot help but refer to Zeno's race paradoxes. Zeno argues that Achilles can never overtake a tortoise given a head start. Each time Achilles reaches the tortoise's previous location, the tortoise has moved on. The chase divides into infinitely many steps, suggesting that motion requires completing an infinite task. The paradox exposes contradictions between logical analysis and sensory experience. It forced later philosophers and mathematicians to rethink notions of infinity and continuity. Zeno elaborates this reasoning further in another paradox, what we call as the field paradox. Paradox is the beginning of philosophy, we always say. Before crossing a field, one must reach halfway. Before halfway, half of that. And ad infinitum. If infinitely many tasks must be completed, motion seems impossible. This paradox distinguishes between conceptual division and physical movement. Philosophers later resolved it through calculus and the understanding of convergent series. The analysis of motion actually continues. Zeno's arrow paradoxes notes that at each instant, an arrow occupies a fixed position. If every moment is like this, movement is an illusion. Similarly, some Buddhist thinkers thought and argued that the present moment cannot be pinned down, making motion almost impossible. These puzzles reveal that human intuition about time and change do not easily align with logical analysis. Such tensions spurred major development in logic. And here we see the birth of logic. Faced with paradox, philosophers developed logic to safeguard rational inquiry. Aristotle, for example, the Nyaya school, and the Mohists independently formulated systems to distinguish valid from invalid reasoning. Logic emerged not to create confusion, but to resolve it, providing structure where illusion falters. Logic also clarifies ethical and political language. In this case, we can also look at Kongzi's rectification of name. Confucius taught that social harmony depends on proper naming. If rulers do not act as rulers or fathers as fathers, society just collapses. Names carry normative expectations. Rectifying names restores moral order by ensuring language aligns with behavior. Gong Sun Lung applies linguistic precision in a humorous way. When we look at, for example, the white horse, Gong Sun Lung argues to a border guard that a white horse is not a horse, exploiting ambiguity between identity and class membership. He manipulates the guards rule to pass. The story, of course, humorously illustrates how linguistic confusion can undermine practical reasoning. Let's analyze Lung's philosophical analysis. According to Gong Sung Lung, we need to distinguish hoarseness from whiteness. Neither property entails the other. A white horse combines both but is not identical to the universal category of horses. This demonstrates the need to separate identity from category and to avoid equivocation, no? And to avoid equivocation. Logic resolves the seeming contradiction. And here we see, how do we resolve the paradox then? The word is, open and close quotation marks, is, has multiple meanings. In a white horse is a horse, it indicates class inclusion. In a white horse is not a horse, it targets identity. And both statements can be true if these senses are distinguished. Recognizing such linguistic nuances prevents philosophical errors. Aristotle tries to develop this clarity even further when he speaks of predicables, if you will. Aristotle distinguishes or create a distinction or distinguishes essential properties from accidental one. Being a horse is essential to a horse. Being white is accidental. So objects persist through change because their essence remains stable. This framework explains how identity survives variation. Gong Sung Lung applies similar insights ethically. And here you see Gong Sung Lung's serious purpose, in fact. Lung critiques rulers who misuse categories seeking scholars, but excluding the timid or praising true people rather than all people. He exposes biases that are hidden in language. His philosophy aims at moral clarity even, revealing how linguistic distinction shape social justice. We conclude by reflecting on why logic remains vital in this case. And why do logic remain vital? Because language often hides conceptual disagreements behind surface agreements. Words like freedom, justice, or rights mask conflicting interpretations. Logic and the rectification of names remain essential, therefore, for ethical clarity and political stability. In a world shaped by language, precision becomes a moral duty that we need to pay attention to. And that is something we need to pay attention to, and not just pay attention to, something that we need to consider heavily. Uh, and that's something we have to look at. So, across these lecture slides, we have traveled through a remarkable intellectual landscape where thinkers from Greece, China, and India confronted the same fundamental puzzle. How do words, thoughts, um, and reality relate to one another. That's basically what we're looking at. Through those separated by geography and cultural worldview, these traditions converge on a shared realization that language is not a neutral tool, but a creative force. It shapes the way we perceive the world, the way we reason, and the way we organize society. Whether in Chuangzi's playful dismantling of conceptual rigidity, Aristotle's formalization of logical structures, or the Nyaya school's analysis of reference, we witness humanity's collective struggle to understand how thought mirrors or fails to mirror the world. Comparative philosophy reveals that no single tradition has a monopoly on insight. Instead, each illuminates aspects that others overlook. Greek philosophy tends to prioritize stable categories and logical rigors, constructing systems meant to secure truth in an unstable world. Chinese philosophy, especially its classical and Taoist strands, emphasizes the fluidity beneath the conceptual boundaries and the dangers of mistaking linguistic distinctions for natural divisions. Indian philosophical systems weave together logic, metaphysics, and epistemology with extraordinary precision, highlighting how perception, inference, and language interact in the formation of knowledge. Together, these traditions form a chorus of perspectives, revealing that our conceptual frameworks are contingent, constructed, and correctable. Throughout our exploration, one theme emerges again and again. Clarity in language is inseparable from clarity in life. Concepts shape our ethical responsibilities, defining personhood at the beginning and end of life, distinguishing justice from injustice, determining who counts as part of our moral community. Comparative philosophy encourages humility in these judgments. It shows that our categories are not inevitable. They reflect historical choices, cultural assumptions, and philosophical commitments. By examining how different civilizations draw the boundaries of meaning, we learn to see the arbitrariness in our own and to question where those boundaries may need revision. Yet the purpose of comparative philosophy is not to dissolve every distinction or to conclude that all perspectives are equally valid. Rather, it teaches us to balance precision with openness. Logic, when used properly, sharpens our thinking and protects us from confusion. But logic alone cannot determine which distinctions matter. The task requires cultural awareness, ethical sensitivity, and an appreciation of the many ways humans make sense of the world. Likewise, the recognition of linguistic relativity should not slide into relativism. Instead, it should foster the capacity to listen, interpret, and understand those who reason within different conceptual horizons. Kakaibang abot tanaw. Ultimately, the study of logic and language across cultures reveals a profound truth. We are united not by sharing the same concepts, but by struggling with the same questions. How do we know? How do we speak? How do we live with others who see differently than we do? Comparative philosophy transforms these questions into opportunities for conversation rather than conflict. It shows that disagreement is not a failure of reason, but an invitation to expand our understanding of what it means to be human. As we conclude this lecture, we recognize that philosophy's greatest power lies not in providing final answers, but in cultivating the courage to question our own assumptions. Logic gives structure to that courage. Language gives it expression. Comparative philosophy gives it depth. In learning from many traditions, we become more capable of navigating a world marked by difference. We learn to think more clearly, listen more generously, and act more wisely. In that sense, the lecture ends, but our philosophical journey continues. Thank you very much for listening.